I recently went down to Devon to visit my grandparents, and as part of the trip I sat down with my grandfather and asked him to go through a couple of photo albums that he'd showed me previously about his time spent with the Royal Navy. In 1945, 1946, 1947, when he was only 17 years old, he'd bartered in Hong Kong a box of Player cigarettes for a box brownie camera, which he took with him and he used to document the whole experience he had over those 2 years. He traveled through the Mediterranean, Gibraltar, Malta, down through the Suez to Singapore, up to the very north of China, Japan, down through Malaysia to Australia. And to have those records of those times and those places which I'll never be able to access, I found really powerful. I knew that I was only going to use about 15 or 20 minutes for the video that I've already posted on my channel, but looking at all these rich stories, it just felt a shame not to share more of them. So this is a video where it's about 35 or 40 minutes of those stories, which I want to post online to at least have them out there that people can access them. These stories which are of a time and a place and I think are very important for us to remember. So I'm just going to let you deep dive. I'm going to keep quiet now and let you get on with it. Here is my grandfather, Dennis Field. I'm just going to clap quickly just to get it all synced up. I should have done it. Okay. Fire away.
Yes, I was 13 years old when the war broke out, so by 1944 I was old enough to volunteer. I didn't volunteer to serve my country, believe me. I volunteered to get the hell out of a war factory I'd been working in. And by 1944, I should point out that I much preferred the uniform of the German Navy, but by 1944 it looked as though they were losing, so I thought, being a very intelligent young man, I decided to join our side, much to the chagrin of the Admiralty. So at 17 I joined the Royal Navy. At that time radar was in its infancy, and I remember when we went to our first lectures, I went into a small theatre. There were guards on the door, and the first thing you saw on the screen was a message that stated everything that you see and learn from this lecture is a closely guarded secret. Disclose it for no one. So at 17, for the first time in my life, I felt quite important. Radar in those days was split into two categories: radar plot, which was navigation, and radar control, which was the control of the guns by radar. So I was radar control. I eventually became radar plot and radar control, and the senior guy. I had the non-substantive rating, as they called it, of a petty officer. I was an RC1, which meant that I control a crew of 14, those responsible for navigation and those responsible for gunnery. Another good reason for taking radar: if you took an ordinary seamanship course, it took a month. Therefore, my course took 9 months in total, so that kept you out of the fighting. Very intelligent. By August 1945, we had the Japanese ended. The war with the Japanese was ended, and we set sail. There's the ship, HMS Bigby Bay class frigate. Mm-hmm. They were specially designed to ward off kamikaze bombers. Wow. They have heavy AA armament. Wonderful experience. Imagine 17-year-old, never been out of the country, first stop Gibraltar. We went from Malta to Alexandria, and then down the Suez Canal. We're in Colombo in November, in Ceylon, or Sri Lanka as it is now, and from there, Singapore, December. Singapore does not look like that now, I promise you. Then we went on to Hong Kong, arrived in Hong Kong for Christmas. And I thought about, perhaps it's the first time I thought seriously about photography. So money, of course, is always a problem. I think we were paid about £1 a month, but cigarettes were of a barter value. So I went into Hong Kong, and with a tin of 50 player cigarettes, which cost me 1 6p, that's about 7.5p, I was having to buy or barter my first camera, a brownie. So from that point onwards, I was primarily shooting photographs of the ship's crew and immediate surroundings. Pincher Martin, a radar, great friend of mine. Noel Botwood, Botsy, he was another radar operator. Most of these guys were radar. Again, I've got a battle dress blouse on, battle dress blouse. But all these were taken with that wonderful little brownie box camera.
Who's this handsome guy?
This handsome guy is me. Believe it or not, I have a photograph in one of my albums, which I saw the other day, of my father wearing that same shirt in 1936 in Paris.
Wow.
And 10 years later, I'm wearing it in Hong Kong.
Wow.
This is 293p for navigation. And that photograph, all these were taken with my box camera and enlarged somewhat. That's me there when I used to smoke, a little. All these guys are radar, Noel Botwood again, Pincher Martin. If I'd have been caught taking a photograph of that, I would have been in serious trouble.
Right.
Although the war had ended, it was still a secret.
Yeah.
That was an A scan for picking up fast-moving aircraft. This one behind my head was for surface vessels. We had arrived in Hong Kong, and this is what the time I bought the brownie camera, or bartered. Yeah. And I started to take photographs on my own account, February 46, where we used to go swimming on that particular bay there. Very interesting. There's the bay, and this hotel, the Lido Hotel. At that time, in 1946, I would have been shot if I'd have tried to cross the threshold of the hotel, because it was reserved entirely for the upper classes and for the officers only. So tough, you couldn't go in, but at least we could go on the beach. Many years later, when I went to Hong Kong on business, I was working with a local sales manager whose name we remember was Dominic Nig. Nig being 5 in Chinese, apparently, NG. And the first day I said, for lunch, Dominic, I want to go to the Lido Hotel for lunch. And he said, well, you know it? I said, yeah, I knew it in 1945. I said, but unfortunately, they wouldn't let me in those days, so let's go. He said, you are lucky because on Wednesday of next week, the hotel closes and it will be demolished. Wow. And I said, oh, that's such a pity, because he has wonderful memories for me of 1945. He said, maybe for you, but not for the Chinese, because we weren't allowed in that hotel either. And we resented it. So we had 2 people going to lunch in that one hotel with 2 different outlooks on the history. Hong Kong, think of Hong Kong now.
Absolutely.
Now there's Stanley Mound, the highest point, and there are masses of skyscrapers. Then we had the great day. Admiral of the fleet, Admiral Sir Bruce Fraser, came to inspect the ship's company. And there's the great Admiral himself. Interestingly, he commanded the battleship, that sank the German battleship, the Scharnhorst. So he's quite a notorious admiral. And my captain, Geoffrey Penrose Dickinson Hall, gunnery officer. And very, very disappointingly, I could have cursed the cameraman. They took all those photographs, blast them, and there's one, that's Noel Botwood, there's a half a man, and I am in the middle of those three. And eventually, the guard of honour, the Admiral, came round and he chatted to one or two of us. And he gets to me, and by that time, 46, so just before my 18th birthday, and looking very young, blonde, blue eyes, and very young. And he said, how long have you been in the Royal Navy? And I said, 18 months, sir. He said, do you like it? I said, not a lot, sir. And my captain, I swear, if he could put that sword through me, he would. You do not tell admirals that you don't like the Navy very much. But he was charming because he said, oh, you'll get used to it. You'll get used to it. I was 17, 18 years of age by the time, just under 18, when we got to Hong Kong. And I thought, oh, never, never will I see these places again. Not a cat in hell's chance. I mean, in the 1940s or before the war, we went on holiday a couple of times to Western-super-Mare, but Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippine Islands, Luzon, Corregidor, Australia, Jakarta, Indonesia, China itself, Hong Kong, Shanghai, or it wasn't Hong Kong, Shanghai, Tianjin, Singapore, Malaysia. I would never see these places. So I bought myself, or bartered, this camera. And that was the start of it. And when I couldn't, when I didn't have the opportunity to take the photographs that I wanted, I bought them and they went into my album. This is Tianjin in northeast China, not a million miles from Vladivostok, the Russian border. And that was very interesting in that in 1936, Japan had invaded China. And our task, when we went up there to Tianjin, we were the first British ship into Tianjin for 10 years. And the Chinese did us proud. Ship's company was about 180. They took over, the Chinese took over the local hotel without a by your leave. They booked us all in and they gave us a wonderful dinner that night. And a couple of days later, we left Tianjin to go down to Shanghai, and on board, very crowded, were 69 ex-prisoners of war. They were Europeans who had been prisoners of war of the Japanese for 10 years. The youngest was a baby of about 9 months. And I remember, as I come from Birmingham, the eldest man was 72 and he came from Birmingham too. This was very, very sad. This was Sub-Lieutenant Williams, who was 22 years of age. He went ashore in Tianjin, as fit as a fiddle, came back on board, not feeling well, fell into a coma and died. And we was buried at sea. And the sailor there, that's my back. I was one of the burial party there. Oh, that was, I can even pick me out there. That's me. This is a battle cruiser, the Barfleur. And we're actually tied up in the Yangtze Kiang, the Yellow River. Yes. And this was a Sunday morning service. This is my ship, the Bigbury Bay. And we went on board the battle cruiser for Sunday morning. We then spent, say, one and a half years cruising. Sounds luxurious, doesn't it? Cruising. Yeah. Went down to Australia. I was in Australia for 3 months. The ceremony of crossing the line, June 1946. a very, very old naval tradition is when you cross the line, you have to be baptized by Father Neptune. And here you got Father Neptune, and if you've never crossed the line equator before, you get ducked in a big tub here by your shipmates. Now, I must one day, I've thought about it, I must one day send these photographs to the city of Darwin, because that was Darwin in 1946. I even made a comment here, Darwin's jetty, exclamation marks. The impression I got was I was walking through a Hollywood set for a Western with dirt roads, and this was the cinema.
Right.
And you might just about see a steel outline of a star. It was the Star Cinema, and wonderful. It had the ground floor seating, the stalls, and it had a balcony, right? Now, in the balcony, you had a roof over your head, and if you were in the rear stalls, you had a roof over your head, which was part of the balcony. But all the front stalls were in the open air.
Right.
Now, Darwin, this was Darwin in the middle of winter in June 46, in the middle of winter, and we were wearing white tropical shorts, very, very warm. June, July, I was in Sydney, and I decided I'd had enough of Sydney, so I had a fortnight's leave, and I tried to persuade some of my shipmates to come with me to Melbourne, which was 600 miles away. So I went down to Melbourne. No one wanted to come. I thought, right, I'll go on my own. I get on a train. Wonderful experience, wonderful. A crack express, the Spirit of Progress, it was called, Spirit of Progress. And it did. It made great progress right through New South Wales. But then there was a problem. We hit the border of Victoria, and the British, of course, had put the railways in, and they put two different gauges. So you came all the way through New South Wales on the Spirit of Progress, then you had to change at 6 o'clock in the morning to another train for a different...
for the right gauge.
Yeah, different gauge. Fortunately, in the carriage with me was a guy in civilian clothes, a man named Ernie Porcher. And Ernie turned out to be Royal Navy, just been demobbed, married to an Australian girl, and I had a wonderful fortnight in Melbourne. I thought I'd be alone. I went to one wedding, one wedding anniversary, and a birthday party, and I visited numerous homes. For a fortnight, they took me around, they looked after me. But that was Melbourne as it was.
Yeah, wow. Gosh.
Flinders Street Station, and there is a photograph here somewhere. There it is. I missed it. These are mine. You can tell they're my photographs because all the buildings are... That's my brownie box, 1946. Right, then back to reality. We left Australia after 3 months, refit, and we went up to Malaysia. We were in Malaya, and these photographs I took in Malaya, Kuala Lumpur, and it looks nothing like that now. That was the British Malaysian Army headquarters. That still exists, that magnificent building. That's still there. Port Dickson in Malaya, we had some leave, so shore leave, and we booked into a camp there. We're all in, that's me in white uniform there. One monkey, me and Scouse. Uniform you don't very often see, but that's the tropical uniform for the Royal Navy, so that's me again. And that's when I had a body. It doesn't look like that now, I can tell you. Nothing like that now, yes. This was when this is an American destroyer, the USS Mansfield. So we went on the Mansfield and they came on our ship. And when this Texan, Roy Shackelford, his name was, we met for the first time, although we'd spoken together, met for the first time, and he came down onto our mess deck where we lived. Well, no, more correct, where we existed. And Roy looked round and he said, you know, say, what's this, the storeroom or a warehouse? I said, Roy, this is where we live. We eat, we sleep, and we sling our hammocks. He said, oh my God. So I go on to the American warship, Mansfield, a bit bigger than us, not much bigger, about 3,000 tons against our 2. Went on board. It was a luxury liner in comparison. I couldn't believe it. Every guy had got a bunk to sleep in instead of having to sling the hammock every night and wrap it up every morning and hang it up on a hook. They had coffee machines on the bulkheads. You can go and get yourself a hot cup of coffee. They had a machine that made 80 gallons of ice cream a day. And to sum it up, I remember it burned in my brain when Roy said to me, he summed it up beautifully. He said, it seems to me that when the Americans build a ship, they put the guys in, and if there's anything left on it, they stick a gun here and there. But when the British build a ship, they put all the guns on it, and if there's any room left, they stick a crew in. And that summed it up perfectly. And taking my life in my hands, December 46, heavy seas off Japan, I climbed up the crow's nest, and in front of there is the ship's forecastle and 2 4-inch guns sticking out, but you can't see them. I bought this in Japan. You've got this pagoda. Yeah, I bought it in Japan, the original. And I started off buying photographs or taking them. So this was taken in December. Mount Fujiyama in Tokyo Bay. I saw that literally at dawn, between 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning on Christmas morning, as we sailed from Yokohama up to Tokyo and into Tokyo Bay and seen Mount Fujiyama for the first time. Kuri, Japan, place we went to. Now, while we were in Kuri, not a million miles away, was Nagasaki. And this is the photographs of Nagasaki of the devastation of the atom bomb. I suppose the interesting thing about this is we hadn't got a clue about radiation. I doubt we could have spelt the word, let alone understood it. So we toddled into Nagasaki, and in the rubble, I picked up what had been a small green glass bottle, and in the heat of the atom bomb, it had twisted and melted into a grotesque shape. And I also picked up what I believe was a piece of soil. It was in a ball. It was solid. It was as solid as a rock, but it definitely wasn't a rock. And I can only assume the heat of the atom bomb had somehow or other solidified it, changed its makeup. Anyway, these were souvenirs. So I put them in my pocket and I take them back on board. Hadn't got a clue the danger that I was in. But some wonderful shipmate of mine stole both the bottle and the piece of soil. I don't know who took it, but maybe he saved me. And that was Nagasaki. 250,000 people wiped out in one night. This building I do remember. This was the Yokohama American PX, and it was the winter of 1946-47. And anybody of my age living in Britain at that time will know it was the hardest winter they'd ever experienced. And I was in here in that December, and I received a letter from my dad. And my dad wrote how lucky I was to be in the tropics, in all that beautiful warm sunshine when Britain was freezing. My father's idea of geography was a little bit out, let's put it like that to be kind, because Japan is very, very cold. And we were actually in there, and I remember very well, full uniform, big thick overcoat, muffler around my neck, hat on, and we had our beer on a radiator trying to warm it up to make it palatable. Yeah. We went to Kagoshima and we took on board 14 Japanese war criminals. They're guarded by our crew on this occasion, but the Australians as well, Australian guys, they were on board. All those 14 war criminals, and we took them to Singapore for trial and execution. Just very briefly, one was a Japanese admiral or vice admiral. Oh, by the way, all these little plaques was their name and a number. And on the ship's notice board, there was a statement which gave the name and number of each one of these men and the crimes that they had committed. And in the reason we had the Australians on board, the admiral was commanding a battleship, large battleship. They sank an Australian destroyer, which went down, going down slowly, but they took nearly 200 survivors on board. Right. And at sea, the Japanese get bored. We all get a bit bored at sea, you know, seeing miles and miles of ocean. So they thought it was a good afternoon sport. They brought 200 men onto the quarterdeck of the battleship. They split them up, half on the starboard side, half on the port side. And while one half watched, they decapitated about 100 men on the one side and threw the bodies into the sea. So we got him. This one, I hope you can see it. He is a Japanese prisoner of war. We had him on board ship, Japanese prisoners of war on board as a working party. And as they were leaving the ship, I stood at the bottom of the gangway with my brownie box camera, ready to take photographs of some of them as they came off. And he's running at me to try and knock the camera out of my hand. Oh, gosh. But I did get the photograph. Oh, we're going down the Suez Canal.
Wow.
Ship going down, that's the Ferdinand de Lesseps, I'm sure you know, was the designer and builder, the French architect was the designer and builder of the Suez Canal, not the British. Ferdinand de Lesseps, that's the memorial, no, the memorial to the French defence of the Suez, that was it. And going down the Suez, we had a wonderful experience on a ship being caught in the snowstorm.
Really?
And the snow, did I say snowstorm? You
did.
What a blithering idiot.
I was going to say that, it's surprising.
It's very surprising, yes. It would have surprised the Arabs as well. To a sandstorm.
Right.
So we had to close all X and Y doors, batten down all the hatches, cover all the guns, and we went down the Suez Canal with the sand coming in from the Arabian desert.
Wow. Yeah.
Now we're in Damascus, Syria. This is in Palestine, and we took a bus, and we went from Beirut, St. Paul. The prison St. Paul was supposedly lowered by baskets from there, and the great mosque of Turkey. We went, my friends and I, went into the gardens of the Mosque of Turkey. Well, that's obviously me in uniform. And believe it or not, that is me smoking a hubba bubba pipe. That is also me, and that's our radar mechanic together. And there was a stall selling the Arab jalabas and so forth. and but we couldn't afford it. We hadn't got that sort of money, and they suggested we'd like to try it on. Mm-hmm. So we tried it on, and they took photographs. That was a Jewish immigrant ship mm-hmm. that we were following. So there we were within Palestinian territorial waters, close up to her. Mm. At the beginning of 1947, the end of 1946, we were called into the Mediterranean fleet, and then for the next 9 months in the Mediterranean, the ship was engaged on these sounds terrible really, anti-Jewish patrols. What we were trying to do was to get a controlled immigration of the Jews who were fleeing Europe and bringing them into Palestine, where they wanted to stay, where they wanted to live, find a new life. Our job was to try and control that. But they were coming in their tens of thousands into a country whose population at that time was less than 1 million. Mm. So there was no accommodation for them, no schools, no jobs. And it was very sad, very sad. We were anchored off an island called Limnos in the North Aegean. British intelligence were stationed in Constanza in off the coast of Romania, and it was here that the illegal Jewish immigrant ships were being loaded. As soon as they left Constanza to come down the Black Sea, the Bosphorus and the Dardanelles, then the British intelligence would radio us. We would be at half an hour steaming notice. When the immigrant ships came down through the Bosphorus and Dardanelles, we picked them up. We couldn't do anything about it. We couldn't board them because we were in international waters. So we followed them right across the Mediterranean. And once we got inside the territorial waters of Palestine, we would, with loud hailers, tell them to stop, which of course they never did. Then we would fire a shot across the bows. They knew very well we wouldn't be shooting at them. They took no notice. And sadly, they ran the ships ashore mainly, but we were in touch with the army, and the army were there on the beaches in a big semicircle. And these poor people then were captured, and then they were taken by ship again to camps in Famagusta in northern Cyprus. You don't want to hear about the...
Oh, I do.
You do?
Of course I do.
You do, right. Well, she was used as a troop carrier. Mm-hmm. So we picked her up in Malta, and on December the 7th, 1947, I was coming home after 2.5 years abroad. So we were loaded up, and there were 2,000 of us in the hangar, massive hangars, no aircraft, of course. So we had our hammocks and we had tables, and we were happy little sailors, all playing cards and what have you. And we have a 7-day journey. Ha ha ha! We thought we were going to have a 7 days comfort. On the second day out at sea, all of us were mustered on the flight deck, and we were designated into various working parties. And I was designated with a party of about 12 of us. And this officer, a lieutenant, took us down below and to a bomb shaft, a bomb lift, if like. And he said, "Now the thing is, chappies," he said, we have this bomb lift. He said, "This is where the bombers come up from the magazine, and they come up to the flight deck, and the bombers are fitted onto the aircraft. And as you can see, very deep. Normally there is a small lift that brings the bombs up, but there is a steel ladder that goes right the way down." He said, "Now, if you chappies have a look down there, you'll see that to quite a considerable depth, it's full of shit. Because, gentlemen, the sewers have been leaking into the bomb shaft." He said, "Now, we would like you, if you would be so kind, to get down there and clear the bloody lot up." So 12 of us spent 1.5 days with buckets and ropes pulling up the sewerage. And we did make a minor complaint. It's probably true. I made a minor complaint and said, you know, a fella can do this, could do a fella not a serious harm, breathing in all this stink, you know. So they've brought in the medical officer, and he was a lieutenant commander, so he knew his job. And he looked down, he said, oh, no. Not bad at all, not bad at all. No, you'll be all right, fellas, you'll be all right. So we carried on, and after 1.5 days, we'd finished the job. So on the third day, we mustered on the quarterdeck again, on the flight deck, shall I say, for another designated job. And we were delighted to hear, over the megaphone, the first thing they announced was, will Operation Stinkhole ratings fall out. You are excused duty for the rest of the journey to the UK. So we went back, so we didn't have to. So that was my memory of the great aircraft carrier, 32,000-ton Illustrious, was cleaning all the sewerage out of a bomb shaft. My God. They're wonderful periodically to take them out, to look back through history, 50 years, 60 years. I mean, I'm 92 nearly, and I started when I was 18. That's a big span. They recall very happy memories, starting with the ship's crew. I took so many photographs of the ship's crew. They were great mates. There was a group of us, all radar or wireless telegraphists, and they were guys who felt the same as I did. You're never going to see this again. I never dreamed that many years later I'd be going to these places again, including Hong Kong and the Pacific and in Asia on business. So I took what photographs I could take, and I bought photographs where it wasn't possible for me to take them myself. And it's just great. It's something to pass on. I mean, some of my albums start with my great-grandparents. So you can go through from great-grandparents right up to the 21st century. Wonderful, wonderful record. And as I've made it very, very clear to the good Lord, if I can't take my albums with me, I ain't going.
Thank you.